Hello and welcome to the Recruit Rockstars podcast, where we focus on the people part of your business. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I interview a world-class expert on talent and recruiting so that you too can build a company filled with rock stars. And I'm super jazzed to be joined today by a guest that I've kind of known for a long time, but never really met until now. And her name is Heather Fox Ewing. Now, Heather is the director of talent at one of the top private equity firms in the world, Great Hill Partners. Great Hill is based in Boston, and I'll tell you a bit more about them in a second. But over the next 20 minutes, Heather's going to share what she has learned along the way on working with their portfolio companies. She started in executive search, spent time at one of the hottest tech companies called Drift. Now she's at Great Hill working with all their portfolio companies, and man, they have a lot. So Great Hill has raised between $7 and $8 billion, that's with a B, and they've invested in about 6 dozen companies along the way, from digital to fintech to healthcare, you name it. So it's safe to say that Heather has seen a ton and is going to share a lot with us over the next 20 minutes. Heather, thank you so much for making the time.
Jeff, so good to be here. Great to meet you finally, like you said.
Great to finally meet you. So why don't we start at the top? I want to focus on you, not so much, Great Hill first. How did you get interested in the topic of talent? I'm assuming you weren't born knowing you wanted to do this. So where along the way did you say, this is kind of interesting?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's like my first interview question ever.
But you automatically get the job, so you're in good shape.
Exactly. Luckily, this time around. I was in college. I was a communications major and always sort of liked the idea of reading people and understanding what really made them tick. And so I think I could have taken that career a multitude of different directions, but talent was really where I landed because it was really understanding the need of a business and then what really somebody's skill set had to offer. And so it was that matchmaking piece of it that was really attractive to me. Started off, finding payroll people for different financial firms in New York City and quickly sort of moved into different realms of recruiting. But that's kind of where the interest came from.
And it sounds like you've definitely found your passion. I mean, this is it.
Yeah, this is it. I think my older brother is a real estate agent and he claims to do the same thing. And I say, yeah, in a similar way, but it totally is. Yeah. And finding a new job is totally emotional. So it's a great spot to be in.
You mentioned something there, which I actually would love to dig into, which is emotion, right? This is an emotion-filled process for both candidate and a company that's thinking of hiring a candidate. And I think that gets lost on people sometimes. What are some of those emotions that you observe as you work with your portfolio companies, and what might surprise listeners to deal with in this process?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny until you're a candidate or looking for a new job, you sort of forget that emotion is such an enormous piece of this. I've changed jobs a couple of times, and when the shoe is on the other foot, it is a totally different experience. And I think what I try to remind our portfolio about is that it is an emotional experience. And oftentimes top talent have jobs, and it's helping them to understand that not only might they not be looking for a new job, but it really has to fit their lifestyle. And whether it's in a new city or they're starting a family, or there are so many different variables that really can affect somebody's job search, and really being able to understand that the person on the other end of the phone, or the Zoom in this case, is a person. And it does help to sort of put yourself in those shoes and understand that when you don't get back to somebody, you're sending a signal. You're always sending signals throughout your entire recruitment process. And so that's always something that I've always tried to remember. You can get desensitized when you do it all the times and all the reps and sets, but it is a good reminder when the shoe is on the other foot.
Each one is a person with their own fears about making the wrong decision and their own family issues at home and whatever it may be. You can't lose sight of that. So
candidate experience is so important.
It's huge. It can make all the difference. Even when you can't afford to pay as much as everyone else, you can still land great talent if you provide a great experience. So what does that look like to you? Aside from managing the emotions and keeping that in mind, what other parts of the candidate experience do people mess up a lot?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it kind of starts from the beginning, and it's the messaging that the recruiter or the hiring manager sends out. In your book, you say kind of not just posting that boring job description, but really having an alluring culture piece or almost billboard out there that is really attractive. So that's one thing I think that people really sort of mess up. And then throughout the entire recruitment process, it's managing the team on the inside to be on the same page, to have really distinct interview sets of questions so that the candidate isn't answering the same set of questions
Which is
6
so
different times.
annoying, right?
So annoying. And I think, of course, maybe you want to gather information from different angles, but it really is important to if you have a holistic view of the candidate. And so being able to assign different areas of expertise or different areas of interview to your interviewing team, making sure everybody's on the same page with what the candidate looks like, so they're not getting mixed messages, and really deciding that this is a role that is going to be valued in the company, and that everybody is on board who's interviewing. So
does that mean in your experience that it should be a democracy and a vote? So let's say 5 people are interviewing our candidate, and 4 say yes and 1 says no. How do you think about that? Should that be a no, or should it be a vote, or should the hiring manager decide, or should the investor or the board member decide? How does that, what do you think is the optimal way to do it?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of different thoughts on this, and a lot of people subscribe to different kinds of thinking. I personally think that while it's a democratic experience, it's not necessarily a democratic decision. And so what I have always trained our interview teams, this even comes from interviewing at Drift, the hiring manager has to decide what they're willing to flex on, what they're not willing to flex on. And the interview team has to be information gatherers. So they're not out there to say, this is my decision. It's more, you sent me out to gather if this person what their sales process looks like, for instance, or what their managerial process looks like, or the attributes that they have. And so they go out and they collect all the information, and then they come back, and I love to do a round table where everybody speaks on the behalf of the questions that they were set out to answer, and then the hiring manager makes a decision. And oftentimes as a recruiter, I've played a major part in helping them sort of sieve through all of the information that they've gotten and help them come to a decision.
And if that means that not everyone agrees with the decision, as long as they've done their part to evaluate what they've been asked to evaluate. You're asking me to tell you if she can make decisions on the spot. I'm telling you she can't. You have to decide if you want to flex on that.
Absolutely. And really setting the tone from the outset with the interviewing team or the interviewing committee that this is not necessarily your decision to make, but you are going out and gathering this information, and ultimately it's their decision. It's less, again, back to the emotion, it's less emotional. You don't ever want a candidate coming in and have 3 of the 4 people not wanting to hire them.
Not a good setup for success.
It takes that piece out of it for sure.
And that begs another question, which I've always wanted to understand, and you're kind of uniquely qualified to answer this. What about if it's a senior level person, let's say a CFO or a head of sales, and the CEO prefers candidate A, but the board member or investor prefers candidate B? Who should make that decision? Should the investor say to the CEO, look, we don't agree, but it's your hire to make? Or is the CEO crazy to hire someone that the board is not in alignment on? Or do you keep looking for candidate C?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it depends on the stage of the company. I think when you've brought in, for a lot of what we do here at Great Hill, we're a majority stake. And so while we're never going to tell a CEO, this is what you're going to do, we have seen the movie, so to speak, enough times to be able to speak from experience and say, this is the person that will get your company to the state that we're looking to get to, and help them see sort of the road ahead rather than focus on what they need right now. It's a lot of the times, that's a lot of the instances that sort of comes up. I would say an earlier stage, it's more the CEO's call, especially when VC you're giving VC money, but it's not necessarily you have a majority stake, and you're sort of coaching from the sidelines versus really being in the forefront and helping to make decisions. But it certainly depends on the CEO and board dynamic at the end of the day. And it certainly can go different ways, but that's typically how I've seen it go.
Not to mention what kind of goodwill or not the CEO has established with her board or his board.
And if they've done it before, and if it's the kind of network he or she has, there's so many different factors. And again, emotion is an enormous part of hiring and building a business. And you really have to be able to temper that with the parties involved. And that's how you choose good board members too, is if you can have those sorts of conversations and not be able to take the emotion out of it.
You mentioned networking. So obviously networking is where we should go first to find candidates. Once we tap out our network, and if we don't have someone like you who's amazing and working full-time to find these people, what is working these days in terms of sourcing, especially since our pandemic began? How do you find candidates?
It's hard. The talent market is, and even despite the pandemic and unemployment rates being higher and what have you, it really is still a very difficult way to go about it. I think oftentimes the best candidates have jobs, and so if you don't have a recruiter that can help you, a lot of the things that you can be doing have to do with social. So
social media.
Yeah. So whether it's, LinkedIn obviously is the social network, but I see Twitter being very broadly used as well with different hashtags as far as Boston jobs or whatever it may be in our case. It definitely is a networking exercise. And so if you don't have recruiters, then really making the job description attractive, really making sure that it's out there and it's refreshed, and maybe you've tapped at your network, but you haven't asked your network to post on your behalf. So that's something else that you can do. I know people are not always on LinkedIn as much as, somebody like you or I would be, Jeff, but it certainly is.
I feel like it's my homepage sometimes.
Me too. Me too. So it can certainly be challenging. And if you have a great board, I know they're your network, but a board can really be a game changer as far as being able to find the right talent, especially at a more senior level.
So let's say we do find the right talent through networking. We've done, as you've suggested, by having a small team interview and everyone is well orchestrated and has the right questions to ask. Interviews are just so notoriously fraught with biases and problems, and most interviewers don't prepare. What other things, other than just traditional interviews, do you advise your portfolio companies to do to get to know candidates better before they make a decision?
Yeah, certainly. So depending on the role, of course, whether the level of seniority or what organization within the company that they're in, there are a lot of different things you can do. Biases is something I want to touch on because that is such a prolific thing happening with interviewing, especially at smaller companies where they're moving so quickly. And they really are trying to get, for lack of a better term, butts in seats, and going with their gut and saying, I like her, or whatever it may be. Really being able to insert behavioral interviewing into your interviewing process, and having, rather than hypotheticals, really asking the candidates to tell them about a time that they did X, Y, and Z, or tell them about a time where they ran up against a problem that the company is having right now.
So that's behavioral. Give an example of hypothetical, just so listeners kind of understand the difference.
Sure, absolutely. So hypothetical would be, say you had to fire 4 people on your team and all were top performers, what would you do? It's the behavioral part of that would be, how have you gone about tough decisions in firing in the past? And give me some of the examples of when you had to make a decision if you were having a layoff or you were having a downsize in company. Tell me about a time that you've had to go through that. And the candidate can say, I haven't had to go through that before. But when you give them a hypothetical, they sort of think about how they might do it. And so you're not getting really the true past experience and past ways of that they think about problems.
So the assumption there is that how they behaved in the past is how they're most likely to behave in the future. It's kind of like a stock chart. Whereas if you're saying, what would you do? They could just make something up. They don't have all the data that's necessary to give you the right answer.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so having somebody give examples of a time that they actually had to go through something, and through that, you can also pick up some backdoor references with, oh, so who did you have to report to in order to do X, Y, or Z, which are also good tips that I also have read in your book, but I've used very much so throughout my hiring experiences.
So you bring up a good point, which is backdoor references, because private equity firms and venture capital firms are known for doing a lot of references, and not a lot of people take the time or understand the importance of it. Can you give an example without naming names of, the time you dodged the bullet because you did a reference and you're like, oh my God, we almost made the biggest mistake in the world. You were so excited about hiring someone and something in the reference actually prevented you from making the hire?
Yeah, it's happened a number of times, which is why I always go back to it. It's happened more at my previous companies, not to name names.
That's fine. What's an example of what you might have heard from a reference that was so bad that it would overturn everything you saw in the process?
So one of the things was really, one of the companies that I worked with was very, very keen on collaboration and being a team player and making sure that it is not a dictatorship, but it really is a whole team pushing an effort forward. And so while we had gleaned through interviews that there wasn't any indication to say this person was not that way, it really turned out that this person really was wanting to take all the credit, wanting to really be the only person who was doing it and not referencing other people within the team for their input or what have you. And because the company was at such a stage where that sort of team mentality was so important, it just made sense to end up going with another candidate. And while we sort of, that might have been a great candidate for a later stage, it all depends on the stage of company that you're in.
Yep.
And at that time, it was really necessary that we went with somebody who was a little bit more collaborative and was much more of a team builder than sort of a team squasher.
It's very difficult to assess someone's collaboration in a bunch of interviews, but if you're talking to a person that's worked with them for 3 years, you get a pretty good sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't always just take one person's say for it or word for it.
Yep.
And so if you can I know private equity and venture capital has certainly, we have enormous networks that we're able to help run backdoor references for companies. So getting more than one is always a great chance if you have the opportunity, or a great move if you have the opportunity. But there is some sense of really trusting yourself as a CEO or as a hiring manager that you have the right sorts of instincts, and then being open to, if you hear something that isn't necessarily jiving with the narrative that you've created.
Yep. The onus is on you to do the homework and figure out how to put those two pieces together. Yeah.
Ultimately. And while you never really want to make a risk, there are times where you're not going to fire 100% of the time and shoot 100% of the time. Right. Yep. So it's challenging for sure.
This is great because we've kind of touched on sourcing and finding candidates, interviewing them, backdoor referencing them. So now we found the right person and we want to get them on board. So let's talk about money, because even an amazing private equity firm like Great Hill with dozens and dozens of portfolio companies, each of those companies is not huge and can't pay what Apple pays or what Google pays necessarily, but you still have to find the best talent. So what advice do you give to your portfolio companies about how to pay or how to compete with others that might be able to pay more?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think a lot of people listening will understand this, that money is not the number one factor in making a decision for a lot of folks. A lot of folks, especially at the senior level, which is a lot of what I'm doing, is they've made their money. They don't necessarily need to have this be the wealth creating opportunity. Some do, and there are times where we sort of have to part ways because the compensation doesn't align. But there are times where people want to learn more. They want to get into a vertical or into a business where they haven't necessarily gotten to touch or get their hands on a specific kind of technology or whatever it may be. There is a ton of opportunity with stock. So being able to really sell that vision of, we consider stock an enormous part of our compensation model. And while your salary and your take home on a biweekly basis isn't going to be the best, the upside of the stock has a really huge potential to build wealth. So that's something we do a lot of the time, is offer a certain amount of stock. Right now, I mean, flexibility has been a huge thing for a lot of people, but I don't know if that's off the table.
I think it's now we're kind of all doing that, right? So it used to be something you could really differentiate on, and now it's tougher. But I do think being able to communicate what your intentions are with your officing strategy over the next year or two is going to be important to some people who have kids at home at school and whatever.
Absolutely. And then on the more, I don't want to say junior side, but more of like first time managers or maybe independent contributors, a lot of what they look for is the opportunity for growth and the opportunity to, if you're able to paint that picture and really be able to translate your company culture and what your company is seeing for the future, if you're able to have a recruiter or hiring manager or whomever translate that down to candidates and be able to paint that picture and see themselves in 12 months, 18 months, where they might be able to have a couple people, more people reporting to them, or that they're going to get their hands on a new technology or help build a new product. Those are the sorts of things that are really important in a lot of what we see in venture and private equity backed companies, because we are driving top line growth a lot of the time.
And that means you're going to need to create paths for people, but the business is also going to need people to rise to bigger responsibilities. Absolutely. I think you raise a great point. You almost want to sell the next job as much as you're selling this job, so that you don't make any guarantees. You got to be careful what you say, but at least paint some potential paths for people.
Absolutely. And that was at Drift. I used that tactic almost with every sell, because we of course offered stock options, but we were kind of middle of the road as far as compensation goes. We had an amazing culture, and but the story that we were painting, we raised several series of capital. We were really driving new products to the market. We were being recognized for what we were doing and creating a new category. And so being able to use that narrative was so helpful, and it really did. Some of the people who really bought in have built very lasting careers and might use that opportunity to learn the most of their careers. So being able to use those sort of, I don't want to say promises, but those sorts of ideas and painting the picture is going to be really, really helpful in recruiting.
At least possibilities as to where this might lead. Look, if you come in and crush this product manager role, here's what I envision for you, because here's what we're going to need 2 years from now, right? But to your point, be careful about making commitments, right? Yeah,
it has to be a two-way promise that's made, that if you come in here and absolutely crush it, there's more stock to be had, there's more responsibility, we're growing. So, and then of course the IPO, the ever burgeoning IPO that everybody is excited about. But
plus, there's always the possibility that a private equity firm like Great Hill might be able to use that person's talents in a different portfolio company down the road, right? So they're almost joining a family or keiretsu in a sense.
That's a massive piece of what I'm doing right now. My role is new at Great Hill, so I've been here for about a year, but it really is helping build an executive network around us and being able to make introductions and open doors and connect people where they wouldn't normally have been privy to or been introduced to. And then, like you said, using opportunities to build wealth in maybe one opportunity and then come back and we'll do it again and again. We've seen that with several different folks that we've worked with over the years.
Once you've shown that you can really create value, you kind of get your ticket punched, and an investor will get very excited about the possibility of working with that person again.
Absolutely.
Heather, I can't thank you enough for sharing your wisdom with us. It's really a very unique perspective, and so I appreciate you making the time to do it. How can people learn more about Great Hill Partners or the portfolio, or get in touch?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been great to be here, Jeff. So thank you for that. We are greathillpartners.com, and I am Heather Fox Ewing on LinkedIn. I believe it's H Fox Ewing on LinkedIn if you want to sort of do the backslash after LinkedIn. But we have our LinkedIn page, we have our homepage as far as our website. So come check us out if there's anything that you're interested in, as far as check out our portfolio companies. If you're interested in anything that we're doing, feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to make introductions, garner relationships with folks that might be interested in learning more.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jeff.